Buenos días, seguimos en nuestro Summit de Customer Experience y ahora vamos a charlar con Peter Fader.
Buenísimo. Bueno, les cuento un poquito de Peter Fader. La verdad que estamos súper emocionados de tenerlo acá. Él ha creado distintas técnicas como lo que es el Customer Base Corporate Valuation, que ayuda, digamos, a los inversores y a las compañías a entender el valor de dichas compañías en función de la evaluación de la base de clientes. Él, bueno, es profesor de marketing de la Wharton School de la Universidad de Pensilvania. Ha escrito distintos libros, uno de los cuales, los más famosos, es Customer Centricity, del cual vamos a conversar. Y bueno, también cofundó distintas compañías como Zodiac, que en 2015 fue adquirida por Nike, y actualmente Theta Consulting, que se especializa justamente en este Customer Base Corporate Valuation. Bueno, bienvenido,
Welcome, Peter.
Welcome, Peter.
Vamos a hacer la entrevista en inglés, pero la van a encontrar subtitulada en unos días. So thank you very much for being here with us, Peter.
It is my pleasure. Glad to talk to you.
Would you like to tell us first what's your definition of customer centricity, just to begin with?
You know, it's very important to start with that because for too many people, it means different kinds of things. Let me tell you what it's not, and then I'll tell you what it is. What it's not is the idea that we are centered around every single customer, that we are every customer's best friend, and we can't sleep at night until our least happy customer is satisfied. A lot of companies say things like that. It sounds romantic. It's a great thing to maybe put out in an advertisement, but it's not very responsible to act that way, and it's impossible to achieve that. So when I talk about customer centricity, I'm asking the question, which customers do we want to be centered around? Who are the most valuable customers? And what is it that we can do with them and for them to enhance their value, to share some of that value back with our firm, while still being aware of all of those other so-so customers and having reasonable relationships with them, but understanding that they'll never be at the center of our attention.
Great. Thank you, Peter. And regarding that, tell us about how would you implement the CLV strategy that I believe it's really related to that, to the customer centricity strategy itself. Can you give us some detail about the different CLV components that organizations should take into account?
Absolutely. So too often when people hear about customer lifetime value, they're suspicious. They think, come on, that's not real. You can't really measure that. You can't really use that. And that's the battle I've been fighting for about 20 years now, is trying to convince people that it is real. It is meaningful. It is actionable. It is something we can actually test and validate. I mean, I admit I'm as surprised as many people to see that we can make customer lifetime value so real. But once I started finding some of the models, which I didn't invent, I kind of came into them years after they were invented, but I was so surprised to say, wow, this works really well. And then I would take it in two different directions. One was from a statistical standpoint, how can we improve the models? How can we build them with different kinds of data or less data? How can we do it in, let's say, an investor setting, if I'm looking at a company from the outside and I don't have any data at all about specific customers? So number one is all the data and analytics. That's the stuff I really do for a living. But then number two is the so what? So if you believe me, if I can convince you that customer lifetime value is real, is actionable, what would those actions be? And so this idea of lining up customers based on their projected value and treating them in accordance with those values. So instead of overspending on some so-so customers, hoping that we can make them wonderful, or equally importantly, maybe more importantly, underspending on some of the really valued customers, maybe taking them for granted, maybe convincing yourself, you know what, they're locked in. We don't need to do anything for them because they're going to keep buying from us. Well, that can be a big mistake. You have a lot on the line if you don't treat those customers well. So figure out that just right balance of spending and what kinds of things should you be spending on? Should it be a loyalty program or a premium service or referral programs or strategic account management? You know, a lot of the things that companies are starting to talk about today, but aren't necessarily managing well, aren't necessarily using data to manage them properly. That's where I'm coming from with lifetime value.
Great.
Great.
And what will you say are the main barriers of adoption when you want to adopt a customer centricity strategy? What are the main barriers? Are they more cultural or maybe technical or?
I love that question. I like the one that you started with because I'm a technical guy. And for all these years, I've been focusing on the technical barriers. You don't have the right data, you don't have the analytical capabilities, you don't have the CRM system, and all those things are important. There's no question about it. But those cultural barriers, man, I've really learned about that the hard way. Because I used to believe that if I can give you the tools, if I can help you overcome the technical barriers, then money will come raining down from the sky. You'll just open up the vault and everything will be great. But I've been finding more and more that it is the cultural barriers. It is resistance to these ideas. It is having the wrong kind of organizational structure. It's having the wrong incentives. It's having the wrong history, the wrong traditions about how we talk about our customers and how we take a lot of the customer-facing activities and chop them up and have different people handle different ones in the organization without talking about it. So these days I put equal weight on the technical and the cultural. Each one is hard to achieve, and achieving both of them, that is far and away the biggest challenge of all.
You know, Peter, culture, it's a strategy for breakfast, no? It's,
It is so true.
it is common. I go to maybe a bit of a technical part of it. I had a question regarding the cost component of the CLV. That is the cost generated by the clients or group of clients. No? I have seen CLV models where obviously part of those costs includes the use of the customer service, technical service, and this kind of stuff. Well, the greater the use, the worse the CLV, obviously. But the problem arises when maybe we as a company are not doing a good job, maybe regarding some broken processes or journeys. And the thing is, well, in some CLV models that I saw implemented, that situation penalize this customer, and it's like an auto-provoked situation, bad situation, no? What's your approach regarding that kind of issues that a CLV implementation may have?
Oh, you raised two excellent points there. Let me focus on each one of them. First of all, there is the cost component. And just like the cultural component, it's something that I tended to underestimate, something that I tend to say, we could worry about that too. But as we get in deeper, as we want to get companies to buy into these ideas and methods, and as we want to get external stakeholders, investors, to really use these kinds of metrics to guide their investment decisions, it's just as important to take the cost component into account as the revenue component. And we can't just, and I'll be the first to admit that in a lot of my academic work, I would just use very simplified notions for margin or for acquisition cost or for the ongoing costs of maintaining relationships. I would just assume that other people in the organization are dealing with that stuff, so I don't need to. But it turns out that in many cases, people aren't dealing with that stuff, or they're not doing it very well. And so it's really important to have, just like we want to have high standards for the statistical models that we use to project purchases and revenue and so on into the future, we have to have equally high standards about how we measure costs, about how we allocate them, about how we communicate them, and about how we manage around them. And so again, I'll be the first to admit that I've been kind of naive about it. It wasn't until meeting my former PhD student, my co-author, my co-founder, Dan McCarthy, who made me aware that unless we talk about costs and we do so seriously, we'll have no credibility. These models are only as strong as their weakest link. We have the projection side down really well. So now let's figure out the cost side. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about and talking to companies about what should count for acquisition costs, what should count for ongoing customer relationship costs. And what we found is that on the accounting side, on the cost measurement management side, the standards are really low. And it's a shame that marketing professors need to tell accountants what to do. But it's important for us to do so, to make sure that people really understand the full value, the net value that customers are bringing to the company, and the downside, the cost side of those activities that companies are doing with the customers. Great point.
Thank you,
Great.
Peter.
And in your consulting projects, do you find things like cohort analysis as a concept that organizations are used to?
Well, that's again, you guys are asking such wonderful questions. It's amazing how many companies are starting to wake up to understanding what a cohort is. And let's talk about that for a second, because a lot of people mix up cohorts with segments. They're quite different. They actually both fit nicely together. Segment would be, if we look at our whole customer base, we say, you know what? We just want to focus on certain kinds of people based on their demographics or based on their behavior or based on their geography. So in some sense, it's a slice of the overall customer base. Whereas a cohort, it's the opposite. It's a horizontal slice. Regardless of what people look like, regardless of where they live or what they've done, let's look at all customers who we acquired at a certain point in time. Let's look at all the customers we acquired in 2018. It's a big mix, some good, some bad, some old, some young, and let's follow them over time. Let's understand how that group of customers is changing. And then let's compare that group to the group after them or the group before them. So understanding how cohorts evolve and how they vary from each other is so important. It's something that, again, I've been making a big deal about for 15, 20 years. Back then, people either didn't understand what I was talking about, they find it confused with segments. Today, many companies get this idea. They look at it regularly, and again, they're looking at it whether they're inside managing the company or whether they're outside evaluating the company for a potential investment. So I'm really happy to see how much progress we've seen on that. But having said all that, it's probably still fair to say that fewer than half the publicly traded companies out there are doing cohort analysis on a regular basis. It's getting better all the time, but there's still some more work to do.
Yeah, because many companies, you should know that, but many companies maybe mix or undercover maybe the overall results without seeing the different cohorts, no? Maybe
That's
the
right.
net.
They look at the customer base as a whole,
Yeah.
and they say, you know, on average, our customers are pretty profitable. Yay!
Yeah.
But when you start looking at the cohort level, and this is something we do routinely at my current company, Theta, let's do our analysis on a cohort by cohort basis. And what we might find is that while most of the customers, although the old cohorts are very, very profitable, the newest ones aren't. In fact, in some cases, we'll see those cohorts, the value of the cohorts dropping dramatically. And we don't know why. It could be that there are no more good customers to acquire. It could be competition. It could be changes in the macro economy. Many reasons why. It's important to know. But once we start seeing those cohorts dropping off, even though the company as a whole seems to be doing quite well, it's important to start taking action immediately, or maybe even to avoid buying shares in that company, because what we're seeing in that newest cohort is much more indicative of the company's future than what we see from the cohorts that are 5 years old. So very important. Those cohorts, those new cohorts, are the canary in the coal mine. And what's going on with them is a better indication of the future of the company than what's happening with the other 90% of the customers. Very important to look at things that way.
We are
Thanks.
almost out of time, but we have time for one more question because we want to keep talking to you. But
Okay. We are going to have in a few minutes Fred Rakel here talking about the NPS evolution and, well, bringing this NPS and CLV on the table. Do you think NPS and CLV should both be tracked in companies? How would you do it? What's your opinion regarding that?
Oh, absolutely. Most academics dislike NPS because it is so simple and it works so well and it takes a lot of our research and makes it look almost kind of useless. I'm a huge fan of what Fred Reichelt has done and of Net Promoter Score. In the same way that I look at the mix of our customers, those high value ones and those so-so ones, it's no different than looking at promoters versus detractors. And so for a lot of companies that are just starting out on this path and they can't yet calculate customer lifetime value, looking at Net Promoter Score is a great early way to start getting used to doing the customer-centric thing. And then to answer your question, there's a wonderful pairing between the two. If you think about it, customer lifetime value looks at people's behavior, it looks at dollars and cents, it looks at the future, whereas Net Promoter Score is more about attitudes. Would you recommend us? And so in many cases, the two line up really, really well. But when they don't, then it's really, really interesting. When we find out customers who buy a lot from us but are critical about us, or the opposite of that, those who say they love us and would recommend but aren't buying a lot, that can be very diagnostic. And so looking at the two together and having the same people in the organization calculating lifetime value and Net Promoter Score can be extremely healthy for an organization.
Thank you.
Peter, thank you very much for your time. It was great listening to you.
It's my pleasure. Appreciate the excellent questions, and I wish all of you the best of luck.
Oh, thank you very much,
Thank
Peter.
you. Escuchábamos a Peter Fader y no se vayan, enseguida seguimos con Customer Experience.